Please welcome Women in Product Board member, Achuthan.
I'm Ashita Achuthan, board member of Women in Product and the CEO of Mood Labs, Inc. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all to day 3 of the Women in Product Conference. Please don't forget, for all accessibility options, including closed captioning, please visit the accessibility section in the conference app. And a big thank you to Blend, our accessibility sponsor. Now, I hope you've all enjoyed the conference so far. I've been to some great breakouts and interactive sessions today. Connecting women PMs with their peers in industry is so essential for building the diverse and equitable industry that we all want. And I hope that everyone has been taking advantage of the networking mixers. Our keynote session today is all about embracing possibilities. And our first speaker has certainly done just that. Lisa Gelobter is the CEO and founder of tEQuitable. Lisa has over 25 years in the industry, and she's led teams developing products that have been used by billions of people, really billions. Now, Lisa has an extensive background in digital strategy, business operations, and product development. Before founding tEQuitable, Lisa worked at the Obama White House as the Chief Digital Service Officer of the U.S. Department of Education. Lisa is actively working to make the world a better, more inclusive place, and she serves on the board and steering committees of the Obama Foundation's Digital Council, Time's Up, /Dev/Color, and the Education Trust. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Lisa Gelobter.
Hi all, I am Lisa Gelobter and I am the CEO of tEQuitable. So they asked me to speak a little bit about my journey in terms of what I've been doing for the length of my career. So that part of it is so that you can see that there's no one right way to have a long career in product management. So just to start at the beginning, first of all, I'm a Black woman with a degree in computer science, which unfortunately makes me somewhat of a unicorn, which makes me cry pretty much every day. But additionally, I also come from a low-income background. And so I'm a Pell Grant recipient. And so while I did study computer science in college and got my bachelor's, it actually took me 24 years to graduate from college. I worked full-time to put myself through school. Turns out working 40 hours a week and while being in school, it's a little bit hard. So it took me a while. But when I left college, even before I'd graduated, I left college making 2 times what my parents did combined. And so for me, different people have different approaches to why they enter the tech field. And some people are super passionate about it, and some people really enjoy all the different things. For me, this was about getting a job, right? I really did have, I have a family that I need to support. And so that is how I came into tech. I really like to say that essentially if it exists in technology, I have done it. So I've done technical support, I've managed technical support, I've done QA, I've managed QA, I've done program management, product management, I've been a software engineer, I've managed engineering and product development. And then I've also served in various capacities, whether as acting CTO or COO, and now I'm a CEO. So I've been in tech for 30 years, so I've had a bunch of jobs. The list is pretty long. I started out working at a company called Taligent, which was the very first Apple and IBM joint venture, they were kind of arch enemies at the time, so it was a really big deal that they had this joint venture. And that was a pretty incredible experience. And I just really understood there that it was about that you really could, that you were trying to transform the landscape. Then I went to work at Macromedia, where I was a software engineer on something called Shockwave, which introduced animation, multimedia interactivity to the web and reached, I think it's like 96% of the internet audience, and really kind of transformed the way people interacted with the web. And I was there for a long time. So I was in San Francisco for 7 years. But the truth is, for me, I just got really tired of being the only Black face in the room. And I grew up in New York City. I know that that's not what the world has to look like. And so, despite the fact that the Bay Area, Silicon Valley was booming, that we had a product that consumers loved, that we were shipping, that we were making money, that our stock was skyrocketing. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so I quit my job and I moved back to New York. Um, and at the time, there wasn't a ton of tech in New York, right? There was finance for sure. There was DoubleClick. But I was going to do neither of those things. And so I was like, look, if I need to waitress, I will waitress. Like, I just can't be here anymore. And I was fortunate enough this is actually where I made my transition into the video space. So I've kind of been at the intersection of tech and multimedia, tech and media generally, since its inception, really. I worked at Feedroom, which was, we did the first online video for NBC's owned and operated TV stations. The CEO of the Feedroom actually went on to become the CEO of CNN. So he had actually kind of started behind the scenes in news. So that was a great transition. It was really, really fortunate that I ended up there. Great transition into video alongside tech. And then I've extended that. I feel like I've kind of gone full circle around the intersection of video and tech. So then I went to work at Bright Cove, which was one of the first online video platforms. We were actually trying to democratize television stations and let more people get access to broadcasting their video. They went on to be a huge a huge video platform, and then have even gone public. Then I went from there to work at NBC/Hulu. So the project that I was working on at NBC was fully contributed to Hulu during that joint venture. So I was on the team that helped to launch Hulu, which, you're likely familiar, but so it really changed the way people consumed media and what their expectations were for watching video online. I then went to work at Juiced, which did they were the same people who did Skype, right? So they were doing peer-to-peer video, which was really interesting. And then I went to run digital at BET, Black Entertainment Television, the television network. And so I don't know how I went kind of from a software engineer to a television network executive. But that was an incredible experience, and just kind of understanding how you could really break down the walls, and instead of kind of using broadcast to go one to many, was to really use digital technologies to actually create a two-way communication channel, which was actually pretty amazing. I think we broke some pretty interesting ground there. So it was really like full circle, ending up at actually working with creatives on technology, right? Having built the platform so that other people could use video, executing against that, and kind of full circle there. And then I got a call from the White House. I went to work at the White House under President Obama, where I served as the Chief Digital Service Officer for the U.S. Department of Education. And I worked on a project called College Scorecard, where we were trying to help students understand what metrics were really important to look at in terms of being able to make an informed choice around what college will best serve them. So it was really as part of that project that I fully came to grok just how much we could use to harness technology to solve what had been previously thought of as intractable problems. And so College Scorecard actually has been credited in just over 3 years with improving college graduation rates in the US by 1.5 points. And like, that's the idea, that's the magic, right? How do you have significant impact at scale? So as I was leaving the administration, trying to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up, I was like, look, this is not rocket science. If we can send a Tesla Roadster into outer space, right, maybe we could use some of those same best practices right here on our home planet to solve some of the issues for the underserved, the underrepresented, and the underestimated. And so that's how tEQuitable was born. So it's a startup, and we are using technology to make workplaces more equitable. And our mission really is to help companies make work culture that's going to work for everyone. And so for example, if my boss makes a sexist crack or tries to touch my hair, right? That's not the totality of who they are. I'm not going to go to HR for that because that feels like that's a nuclear option. I'm not trying to get them fired, but I would like the behaviors to stop. And so, flip side though, is if I feel like I'm being overtly discriminated against or harassed, right, then I want the company to take immediate action. And so, what tEQuitable tries to do is help the employee in either of those situations figure out what their next step should be and how they can move forward from there. And then simultaneously, oftentimes companies don't really have a great sense for what's happening on the ground day to day in their culture. And so we try to provide data and insights back to them. So we do two things. We provide a sounding board for employees where they can come, get advice, explore their options, and figure out what their next step should be. And then while they're doing that, we gather data that we anonymize and aggregate, and we use that to identify systemic issues within an organization's culture. We create a report for the management team with actionable recommendations. Right. So for us, it's really important to work on both sides of that equation. We want to empower and support employees, but we also really want to help companies identify and address issues before they even escalate. Right. We want to make real change. We're trying to create this virtuous cycle to address the systemic stuff of it all. All right, so the reason I tell you all this, right, this is a 30 plus career, is because there is no one correct path, right? I know that for a bulk of my career, it looked like I was kind of doing tech media and that every step made sense and was all thoughtful and planned out. But of course, none of that actually happened that way. It was really about kind of assessing each new opportunity, figuring out where I would learn the most, but also for me, again, very risk averse because I always had to support. I have financial considerations that are real. But for example, I've been laid off a ton. There was about a decade where I would essentially work for 12 to 18 months and then I'd be laid off for 6. So I actually ended up having to start budgeting my money as if I was only going to be working 3/4 of a year. Like that happened a bunch. I've been fired once. Although, in all fairness, 3 years later, I actually got an apology from the company because it turns out my former boss had been also fired for abusive behavior and bullying. So whatever. But I'm just saying, like, there are different journeys, there's different paths through, there's different things that will happen to you, you will happen to other things. And there's not just one smooth path in terms of thinking about how you can approach stuff and what the right answers are. So I would say it's really important for you to kind of figure out what your strengths are and then find jobs specifically that play to them, that actually take advantage of your superpowers, of your strengths, the things that you excel at and that you like doing. So one of the things that I think is, I think about this question every day about, well, am I doing the thing that I want to be doing? Am I in the right place? And I know that I am now because, I find myself with the articles that I'm reading and the studies and who I follow on social media and all that. Like that's all stuff that I would be doing anyway and reading about anyway, but it's also all in service of tEQuitable. And so I know that's how like the stars are aligning, that I'm in the right place now. A couple of other just quick notes. One is, people always ask me about mentors and mentorship. And I will say, again, I was pretty early on, especially around Black folks in tech. And so I didn't really ever have any mentors. But what I did have was I had peers who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And so they just kept pushing me forward, encouraging me, putting me up for jobs or roles that I would never have thought of for myself. And so like that's the other thing that I would suggest is like building out community, and not in insincere ways, right? Not just to get ahead, but to really support each other and build on each other, because it's really good to have people like what they call your kitchen council. And for me, there's also one thing that was really stood out to me that was very different about working in federal government is that, right, multiple successes, it's not a zero-sum game. Zero-sum gain. It's not just one pie, right, that we're only getting our little slices of because there's a limited amount of pie. It's a win for my sister is a win for me. It's a win for all of us. And so the idea of actually striving to lift each other up, to support each other, and I think that's exactly what this organization and this conference is trying to do. So that's the idea, is like creating that community and that support, I think, is so critical. And that's it. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa's career definitely shows that there are many paths forward, and it isn't always a straight line from A to B. Next up, we have a panel of incredible product leaders building products that move us beyond equality and equity to deliver products that drive justice for all. Starting up, we have Anne Diaz. Anne Diaz's non-traditional career path first started in the nonprofit sector. And this rooting in community has helped her hone her focus on building inclusive user experiences since transitioning over to tech. Now at Airbnb, Anne has worn several different hats. She's been a research lead and manager. She spearheaded the initial product for in-home accessibility and is now the product manager for Anti-Discrimination product team at Airbnb. Ivor Horn is a physician executive with over 20 years of experience in health systems, academic and venture-backed entrepreneurial organizations as well. As the Director of Health Equity and Product Inclusion at Google, Ivor leads diversity and inclusion strategy development, implementation, and evaluation. Elise Roy is the Vice President of Inclusive Design and Product Accessibility at Salesforce. Elise is an industry thought leader in inclusive design. She's a former human rights lawyer, and she's a design expert. Prior to Salesforce, Elise led product teams in inclusive design and accessibility for Google, and she has her own inclusive design consulting company, catering to Fortune 500 clients. And our moderator, Prashanthi Ravanarapu. Prashanthi is a purpose-driven product leader with a passion for solving customer problems. As a senior director of product at PayPal on the consumer financial services team, she's focused on ending poverty by building financial products that improve the financial health of customers. And now I'll hand it over to Prashanthi.
Welcome, everybody, to this Justice by Design panel, where you'll hear from some amazing leaders across the Bay Area working on this really important space. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Prashanthi Ravanarapu from PayPal, and I wanted to introduce Justice by Design by sharing how the tragic and senseless deaths of so many Black people, including Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the unacceptable intolerance displayed against Christian Cooper have not gone unnoticed. The inhuman killing of George Floyd in May 2020 ignited a movement, but the movement was sparked by many, many instances of unacceptable injustices. And these have continued over the year. It has really translated into how you see the anti-Asian hate and in several other incidents that have been happening across the world. One such moment was Black Lives Matter that gained attention first locally, then nationally, then internationally. Millions of people expressed their belief in the need for justice in different ways. They protested, marched, donated, volunteered, raised funds, called their friends, and did whatever they could. Since every individual and organization has been doing something, some of us also started asking this question about, well, what does justice look beyond what we see already? How can we stop this by bringing large-scale change to anything, any particular issue like this? We need to address it through many ways. We need to address inequality, inequity, and injustice. Justice would be to change the system so that we offer equal access to everyone and then customize the products through tools and opportunities. So a question for all of us as product managers, builders, and designers is how might we think about justice through our work? And to learn about how we can bring this into the work, we have some really esteemed panelists. And with that, I wanted to turn it over to the panelists and really start by asking each of you to introduce yourself, your work, and how you got into this space and why it's important for you. Ivor, we start with you.
Sure. So I'll start. My name is Ivor Horn. I am Director of Health Equity and Product Inclusion at Google and Google Health. I'm a clinician, a pediatrician by training, and a health services researcher. Spent a couple of decades in academia researching health communication and health disparities, and then how technology played a role in that, and how we could potentially build technology to address the inequities in health as we move forward. And so that became my intersection with technology as a clinical person, and first joining a startup that focused on service and technology, the intersection of service and technology, and now at Google in working with our teams on how do you build health equity into the DNA of the products that we build.
That's amazing. Thank you. How about you, Anne?
Yeah, my name's Ann Diaz, and I'm the leader of the Anti-Discrimination product team at Airbnb. And prior to coming to Airbnb, I actually started my career in the nonprofit sector before moving into technology. But my focus has really always been on how people try to come together to solve collective problems. And at Airbnb, our team is really interesting. It's a pretty unique one. We operate to try and ensure that every single person who uses Airbnb has equitable access to amazing trips. And we do this in two ways. The first is by building features and product interventions that really try to enforce and also highlight our non-discrimination policy. And the second, and really the area that I'm honestly most excited about, is by building data tools that really help us understand where and how inequities are showing up in our product experience. And as for how I got involved, in 2016, when the hashtag Airbnb while Black was really forcing the company to grapple with some pretty ugly realities, I felt myself just personally compelled to be a part of the solution. I feel like as a product person, getting to work on an as yet unsolved societal issue while also figuring out how to make technology more fair and inclusive, that just felt like the dream job. And honestly, it has been so far.
Yeah, and you're definitely making those strides. Elise, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elise. I am the VP of Product Inclusion and Accessibility at Salesforce. I just started a month ago, so I'm just getting my feet wet as well. I got into this space because of a personal connection. I have a hearing loss. I'm almost completely deaf. And a few years ago, I was looking at how deaf individuals are excluded from the fabrication realm in different ways. And one way was that we often can't hear this pitch change that happens before a product is about to kick back at you, before a tool is about to kick back at you. And that's a safety hazard. And so I tried to solve for it. And my solution was a pair of safety glasses that visually alerted the user to pitch changes. And that alert went off before the human ear could pick it up. And it was also something that could be applied across a variety of different tools. And so this was a safety mechanism that worked for everyone because, we have woodworkers who are working in noisy settings and sometimes they can't hear that pitch change. And it was a single solution that could be applied across a variety of products. And so the WALT was interested in picking that up. And I kind of stumbled upon inclusive design's premise of when you often design for one excluded population, you end up designing something that benefits everyone. So that's kind of like how I fell into this space.
That's great. What a compelling story. Thank you all for sharing about the great work you've done. What would be really helpful for me and the listeners to understand is maybe give some examples of what you thought were most inclusive or just products or experiences that you've either built yourself, worked on, or maybe something that your company's worked on, maybe just something that you've experienced even if you didn't build it. That would be great just to provide color to the listeners.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on something that Elise said that is so important to kind of the foundation of what we're talking about. If you are building for, even though you're building for someone who's experiencing, and for us, the way that I think about it in healthcare, if we're building for the people who are experiencing what's most broken about our healthcare system, like we're building for everyone. It makes the whole ecosystem better. It's not, it's a win. It's a winning opportunity. And so I love the fact that you built something to solve a problem, but then at the same time, that it was applicable in so many different areas. And I think about, for me, an example that I'll give is during the pandemic, one of the things that was really, really key is that we recognize that many people across this country were experiencing health disparities. And for those of us like me who've been doing this work for a very long time, this was not new to us. It just became more apparent to the rest of the world. And one of the things that we had to transform about healthcare is the very rapid adoption of telemedicine and telehealth. And when it came time for vaccines, we were using telemedicine solutions and we were using digital solutions. But what we realized is that people who were, for example, in need of scheduling vaccines, everyone didn't have a mobile phone. Everyone didn't have access or the ability to schedule online. And one of the things that was really great is one of our teams developed is the ability to call communities when they identified communities, to use our bots and our technology to actually call. Our cloud teams were able to do that. And I think it's really important for us to understand not just what the amazing things that our technology can do, but also understand the limitations and how we need to simplify it. Another thing that happened during the pandemic was the rapid adoption of telemedicine. But what we learned is that telemedicine is not just the video telemedicine. Telemedicine is also the ability to make a phone call to your patients and check in on them on a regular basis. In that, if we think about the most simple solutions as well, then we're expanding our inclusion for who we're serving.
That's wonderful. What you've identified is how you can widen the aperture of what you might think is a product, but then actually the product or solution could be much simpler by just widening that aperture for people who are struggling in a different way. Great insight. Elise, how about you?
Yeah, my team has done some pretty amazing work in terms of ensuring that we are using much more inclusive language throughout our various products and AI and development. For example, a lot of engineering language in the past has been a bit insensitive in terms of race. There are things such as blacklist or master and slave that refers to primary and secondary servers. And so we're implementing processes and tools to ensure that we're removing those languages or words and terms from various parts of our products and development processes.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think it also touches on how we communicate in virtual or in-person meeting rooms, calling or saying, "Hey guys," instead of "hello," or comments when we talk about moms and dads versus just talking about parents, because they might be just parents and they don't have to be identified as male or female. I think a lot of those also need to change in how we communicate. That's a great thing. I think the minimum we can all do is walk away to change something in our communication and in our code language, like how you're talking about remove blacklist, whitelist. Call it allow list and not allow list or something like that. Really great. Anne, would love to learn from you too.
Yeah, Ivor, there was something that you mentioned that really resonated with me, which was about kind of identifying where the problems are and using that as the starting off point to figure out how do we make big improvements. And one of the things that we've done on my team is really sort of stepped back and said, if we can't measure the problem of racial inequity, how are we actually going to ever solve it? We have to be able to understand where and when and how it's happening at scale. Of course, we pay a lot of attention to the contacts that are made through our customer support line and that sort of thing. But that's really where something has gone way off the rails on Airbnb. What we need to understand is how is every single part of the core product experience impacting different demographic groups? Is it working equitably for everybody? And so we spent actually a couple years developing, in partnership with a number of civil rights organizations and privacy organizations and academics too, a system that we launched last year that we called Project Lighthouse. And the idea behind Project Lighthouse was, let's create a data analysis process that will allow us to actually narrow in on racial inequities that may exist within our core product flows, so that we can prioritize and track our progress towards mitigating any of those experience gaps that we find. And we do all of this using anonymized data. So the idea was, we don't want to kind of buy into that argument that civil rights and privacy can't coexist. We feel like they absolutely must and should. And we last year also published the methodology that we used publicly so that other tech companies can do the same. And I think it's a relatively heavy process that we created, but it was a huge step forward for us, just in terms of being able to get us to the point where we can really, again, at scale, have a sense for what's going on here and how are the things that we're doing to try and make this problem better, how are they actually working?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think and it touches upon an important trend about data in this space as well. And so to build on that, I often hear multiple terms. I hear the terms of product inclusion, design ethics, universal design, and now I'm calling it justice by design. But all of these really indicate the underlying need to build equitable or just products. So as you think about this space, what changes do you anticipate happening in the next few years in the industry? And what should we all as product managers, builders, designers should keep in mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, one of the engineers on my team has this funny analogy, which is that in Silicon Valley, I think data is really our love language in many ways. If you can measure something, that's what you prioritize. That's what you pay attention to. That's the stuff that actually gets where the movement happens. And so, I think that there's been some absolutely incredible work that has happened, really pioneered by companies like Microsoft and like Apple in the digital accessibility space. And I think the sort of next frontier of all of this, continuing to build on those foundations, really is looking at racial equity in products and in product outcomes and understanding how the things that we're building are impacting different demographic groups and making sure that we have systems in place to really understand how our products are impacting folks. And if I were to have a crystal ball and be able to make a prediction or a hope or a wish for where I'd love to see us as a collective industry be in, say, 10 years, I really want the idea of building for equity within our products to be as ubiquitous, as expected, and quite honestly, as boring as maybe usability is today. I think usability is a term that, a couple of decades ago was really new. There was a ton of research being done into it. And now you don't really talk about it. And that's not because usability doesn't matter, but it's because it's just so core to building a great product experience that it's table stakes, it's expected. And I want to see this idea of building for equitable outcomes and equitable access to be the same, to have that same sort of foundational level in all of our work.
Yeah, and what you bring, and I work in the healthcare space. I work in healthcare, and when you start talking about disparities in healthcare, it is so important to recognize that who you're building for. And understanding the data and what the evidence is and who's experiencing the inequities, and making sure that you're building for those populations and building that from the beginning and moving as far upstream in the product development process in the early ideation stage, that the team is informing and educating themselves. Because I sit at this intersection, I work with these engineers and these product people, and I'm a healthcare person. And we know that from our experience that building for all and building the same thing with the mindset that all boats rise is just not the case, because what will happen is you'll worsen disparities you'll worsen inequities and differences in other areas, because you haven't built for those who are experiencing the disparities. And back to Elise's point, by building for the population that's experiencing the inequities, you're building for all. Yet if you start with building for the highest level and those who are experiencing the best, then you're going to actually create more, you're going to worsen inequities by doing that, especially in the healthcare space. So what I would like to see, and where I think we're going, especially as it relates to health, we're moving away from just having an experience and looking at the engagement, but we're actually looking at, are we driving change, and are we driving change in outcomes and closing those gaps in inequities in care? And I think we are at a place now in health technology where we're starting to think about that. So like you said, I want us to be thinking about addressing equity just as part of the DNA of what we do. And it just is part of, you don't start building until you've started answering that question of what gap you're trying to close.
This is why I hate going last on this type of question, because you've already said it all. But yes, I'm totally there with you. Again, I echo what's been said, and what my goal is completely in line with that, and that I don't want to see designing for inclusion or equity or justice to be an add-on. I want it to be a regular part of the process. I want people to see it as good design. And I think some of the things that we need to get there is more case studies in terms of not only the fact that it's valuable in terms of inclusion, but it's also valuable in terms of how we create more adaptable products that address a much wider range of needs, that address more the fact that we're in a global world and we access products from all sorts of different places. And because of that, our abilities change moment to moment. And so when we're building in things in inclusion, we're actually building in that adaptability into our products.
That's right. And I think to wrap it all up, one thing that I've noticed over the years is if a couple of decades ago, learning from the customer might have not been understood really well. But now human-centered design, customer research, and all is part. What we need to change is diversity in customer research. We can't talk to the same kinds of customers. We need to talk about diverse customers. That way, quote unquote, corner cases are no longer corner cases, because they are the unique needs of a particular segment or race or diversity that needs to be brought in. And I think that's what all of you are alluding to. When we get to that part, then justice by design, product inclusion, and all of this doesn't become a job of some of us. It actually becomes just the way everybody operates, which is going to be so phenomenal. So that's great. Thank you for the wonderful conversation. Would love to start changing the conversation a little bit more towards, okay, as all of us walk away from this conference, what can we all do? As an individual, seems like such a complicated area. What can I do? So to address that, a couple of questions I have with you, and maybe I'll start with you, and please, Ivor and Elise, feel free to add. But the question for you, Anne, is how can we advance inclusion or justice in our products? How can one get started? How do I get started?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, curiosity is probably the most important place to start. there is an amazing quote by Maya Angelou that has been very, very helpful for me, which is that do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And I think that this work, that's a really good grounding for all of this. Product inclusion, product equity, it's kind of like wet clay, right? It's this area that is still quite nascent. And just as our society certainly has not figured out how to create equitable outcomes, our tech products are not there yet either. And I think that first recognizing that this is a new area, that there's a lot to learn, a lot to uncover, and a lot of our own biases to overcome ourselves, bringing that curiosity of who is my product working for and who am I leaving out? Product inclusion is this really nice concept, but if you don't consider it, what you're doing is essentially product exclusion, right? As if you're not considering everybody, you are leaving people out. And so I think for every product manager who's watching, if you can really step back and sort of ponder this and be really, really honest, and you don't have to just think about this on your own. You can consider bringing in people to do adversarial testing. Can you break parts of your product flow by bringing in different demographic groups? People with different abilities, people of different ages, people with different devices, people with different lived experiences, and see how do they interpret your product. Those sort of qualitative measures, I think, are a really great place to start to begin to highlight those spaces where you may not be able to see around all the corners and you may not actually know everything that's happening. And then, of course, I'll continue my mantra of investing in data, really investing in systems that can help you track your progress. So you're not just making a platitude of saying, we care about this issue and we want to do better, but what are the bars that you're setting for yourself and your product experience that you want to commit to hitting and that you hold in as high esteem as any other sort of OKR or KPI that you're tracking.
That's great. Thank you. With that, I'll switch to asking Elise you a question of what role do you see product managers play in this space? What are some tips that you can give to them?
Product managers are often the gatekeepers in many ways in order for product inclusion to succeed. If they don't recognize the need, often it won't get prioritized in our products. And so it's so important for them to, in the planning stage, reach out to various possible excluded populations, people who are experienced in this in their companies to understand what's needed to build it into the product development process. And, also recognize that sometimes there is more upfront cost in terms of taking time to research and co-design with this population. But even though there's more upfront costs, the long-term rewards are just like 1,000-fold and completely worth it.
So well said. So well said. Thank you, Elise. Let's close with Ivor. One question for you would be, what would you say is the one action, even however small it might be, that all of us can take today walking away?
Oh, wow. One small action. That's a tough one. And coming after Elise, because Elise, you being the last one this time, you said something that's really important. It's the upfront work. And the action that I would say coming from that is first, I'm going to have a few things. First, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you're going to be working with communities and people, and they know more than you do. And it's off our type A personalities. It's tough to not be the expert in the room. So get comfortable with being uncomfortable. so that you can ask questions and learn. The second piece that I would say that I think is really crucial and goes to the comment that Elise brought is like, make sure that you're budgeting for that upfront work in building those relationships and building that trust and doing that research so that you have the data. And then my last piece is build it into your product development process. Make it a part of your product development process such that it can slow or pause or halt a process if you haven't answered those questions.
Great advice. Thank you. And I'm sure like these are actually tips that we can do right away. So thank you for that. So to close the panel, I think the question, as a reminder for ourselves, the question we pondered on in this panel is, as product managers, how might we build products that go beyond equality and equity and truly lead to justice and inclusion? So if as product teams, we are building product experiences that are just, fair, and equitable, regardless of race, gender identity, income level, ability, or any other dimension, we would not only be able to impact society at a much larger scale, but we'll actually be doing our part in tipping the scales towards justice. So with that, I hope all of you walk away with amazing learnings from Anne, Elise, and Ivor. I definitely was inspired and learned quite a few things myself. I'll definitely implement some of those. So thank you all so much for listening, and thank you all, Anne, Elise, and Ivor.
Thank you, Lisa, Prashanthi, Anne, Ivor, Elise, and to all of you who've joined us today. I hope these talks have inspired you to think about your career and your products in new ways. I'd like to thank all the speakers this morning for sharing their stories and their insights. It is an honor and a privilege to have them here. And a huge thank you to our sponsors for making this whole conference possible, especially to our title sponsors, Facebook, Google, Upwork, and PayPal. These companies have provided important year-round engagement with and support of women in product. And we greatly appreciate their support for the conference and our community and for all the work that we do. So thank you. Don't forget to visit them all in the sponsor pavilion. So thank you everyone for joining our closing keynote.